Hello everyone and welcome back to Open Your Eyes to the Universe. I'm Gabrielle Martin and it's a total pleasure to welcome you to our first episode in 2021. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Open Your Eyes to the Universe is a series of contemporary talks, conversations, open-eyed meditations and prayers, and interviews with people who inspire and uplift others by sharing their wisdom, their insights, and their experiences. Now tonight, our focus is endings and beginnings. Our topic is Invocations 2021. As you know, Invocations refers to that action of calling forth someone or something. And in the closing of 2020 and the beginning of 21, I've been sharing conversations with friends on the interplay with inner movement in the context of the pandemic-restricted outer environment, or the outer movement, and inner stillness amidst huge outer turbulence, as well as inner activism and its relationship to the form and quality our outer activism may take, like respect begets respect and so on, trust begets trust. And in these conversations, we've been reflecting on what are the spiritual resources we need in these times? What kind of consciousness could I contribute during this year? And what is time calling us to do on an individual level, as well as like being a global citizen? What's time calling me to do as a global citizen? Earlier this week, the young poet laureate Amanda Gorman recited her inspiring and stunning poem, "The Hill We Climb," at the inauguration of US President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. And in her poem, she invoked three key words: rebuild, reconcile, and recover, as markers for the new year and beyond. Well, tonight on Youniverse, we're in the company of Bishop Philip Huggins, who's the president of the National Council of Churches in Australia, and Charlie Hogg, the director of the Brahma Kumaris in Australia. Together, they will share a conversation of their invocations for 2021. Viewers, as always, we really welcome your questions. If you have access to the chat box, feel free to write your questions and we'll ask them during the Q&A. I'm going to begin by introducing our first guest speaker, Philip Huggins, to you, and we'll introduce our second speaker, Charlie Hogg, to you when he's about to speak, so in due course. So it's lovely to have Philip with us. In addition to being the president of the National Council of Churches in Australia, he's also the director for the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture. He and his family presently live in Canberra. I met Philip when we were co-hosting a relational transformation space for delegates and negotiators involved in the COP25 conference. It's a Convention of Parties conference. It was held in Madrid during 2019. The space was about the interconnectedness of climate change and consciousness. It was an international space, very intentional, offering authentic conversation, deep listening, and respectful, trust-based relationships. And I really noted that Philip is someone who embodies these values and qualities deeply, and it was enlightening working alongside him. And as I was heartened with one of his stories of how he came into faith-based activisms, and I'd like to share it with you, because it tells of an event that may seem insignificant at the time, but when you look back, you really see that it was life-shaping. So let's go back in time when Philip's first child was a baby and his family was living on their little farm. Philip was endeavouring to give his family all the nurture of a country childhood, with homegrown vegetables and milk from the cow that he actually milked himself. So I think you get the picture. Now, Philip had a practice to pray over his sleeping child before going to bed himself. And this was a prayer for God's presence and for the holy angels to watch over their child as guardians of the divine peace. It's just beautiful, isn't it? And one night when he was praying, he was given to realize that to be a good parent, he had to do more than try to make sure their home was safe with clean water and good nutrition. He realized the external environment beyond home also needed his contribution. Saying his yes to this realization set him off into a life of peacemaking work nationally and internationally over the next decades. I guess you could call moments like this quiet inner epiphanies. From his story, you may recognize quiet epiphanies in your own life. Philip's 2020 spiritually focused activism includes climate change and nuclear disarmament. Philip, it's a pleasure to have you with us on Open Your Eyes to the Universe tonight. A very, very warm welcome to you. We're looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you, Gabrielle, and it's lovely to be here and lovely to have this opportunity to share together. One of my learnings from this past period has been that you can actually do meditation on Zoom, and the kind of way we can feel supported by one another when we meditate together physically, wonderfully, mysteriously, we have the same sense of being supported in our meditation when we do it on Zoom. I think this is an amazing and wonderful and mysterious matter. But what it leads up to is that my suggestion, if you don't mind, if I just guide us all for a couple of minutes into quiet meditation, silent meditation, using the Jesus prayer. And after that, I'll share a little bit about why that means a lot to me, and talk a little bit more about the subject that Gabrielle's just outlined. So if you'd like to make yourselves comfortable wherever you are, and this is a wonderful element of the digital age, that this is streaming out to all kinds of places. So wherever you are, just shut your eyes, close your eyes, make yourself comfortable. A few breaths, deep, but not to the point of any strain, breathing out and breathing in. In every spiritual tradition, we learn that a rhythm of breathing helps for the mind and the body to better settle. Breathing out and breathing in. It isn't long before we become aware of thoughts coming. The thoughts come and go. In this mantric form of meditation, rather than allow the thoughts just to come and go, place in your minds and repeat over, as if to yourself, Jesus, have mercy. Remembering that the word mercy in its origin speaks of the compassionate heart of God. Simply repeat over unto your breath, as if to yourself, Jesus, have mercy. When you lose the prayer, find you've started to think about something else, ever so gently return to praying, Jesus, have mercy. And we'll meditate, pray this way just for a couple of minutes, and then I'll draw you forth. Praying, Jesus, have mercy, returning to the prayer when we find we're thinking something else. And you might like just to take a couple of moments to ever so gently open your eyes. Well, one of the things I have learned is the importance of trying to make sure I meditate like that ahead of any responsible activity, which every day is full of responsible activity. And so it's good for me, at least, to be able to begin this by simply praying, Jesus, have mercy. I had a very vivid experience of Jesus in my 20s, and afterwards knew I had to try and stay close to Jesus, and I knew that was possible and is possible through the sacrament of Holy Communion, and reading the scriptures and spiritual conversation. But for at least my kind of temperament and mind, mantric meditation, which I'd practiced previously, and this form of it in the Jesus prayer, often called the prayer of the heart, gave me that way of keeping connected, keeping better in communion. So I practice the Jesus prayer like we've just done now, but also through the day, wherever I'm going. And the mystery of the grace of it has been and is that over time, the prayer, which is why it's called the prayer of the heart, kind of descends from the top of your head to your heart. And one finds the prayer praying in one. I find the Jesus prayer happening in me. I mean, this is the consequence of many years of trying to practice faithfully, and better times and not so good times. But in the grace of God, that prayer now is praise in me. And it does help me to be better centered for whatever expected and unexpected events might take place through the day. And it's the more that one prays this prayer, the more wonderful becomes an awareness of the connection between name and presence, and also just how beautiful God is in God's love for all humanity. In my understanding, our Creator, who created this universe from nothing, this universe of beauty and splendor, and gifts us with life and invites us to be loving of one another and grateful to the Creator of all that is seen and unseen. And as that awareness of how beautiful is God, how as Julian of Norwich received as revelation of the divine love in a not dissimilar time to the one we've been through, when there was dis-ease in the land, and she had those astonishing revelations of the divine love, and had the wisdom to sit with them for some years and meditate on them before she wrote her book, Revelations of the Divine Love. But in essence, she came to know and live from the revelation that God is utterly kind and unassuming, utterly kind and unassuming, which of course one doesn't need to go into too much elaboration to see. Therefore, it quite critiques some of the ways in which this religion has been misappropriated and misused to oftentimes disastrous effect. But God, utterly kind and unassuming, continues to renew our hope and give us new and fresh days in which to do our best to honour this wonderful gift of life. A friend has been sharing with me, and maybe it's perhaps the stage I'm in, but a good one-line sentence is very helpful for the meditation as compared to a long book with no pictures. There's one line from a saint of the 3rd century: in wonder we comprehend. In wonder we comprehend. And it goes with another one line from another great saint of those early centuries. God will always have more to teach us, and we will always have more to learn. God will always have more to teach us, and we will always have more to learn. So in that context, what are the learnings from this past period and into this period we're in now? Well, I think many people have reflected that it's given us the opportunity to do a stock take of the way we've been living, and to many ways simplify our lives. And certainly we've been doing that. We were not able to move. We live actually in Point Lonsdale, outside of Geelong, southern Victoria. We weren't able to go too far in for a long period, and so that helped us to make decisions we'd been delaying, and helped us to simplify in many, many ways. Simple things like clean out the shed. And I learned I love to swim and swim every day, and I became one of those people who swims through the winter in the Southern Ocean. So even though we were aware of so much sadness in the world, and I had to take some of the funerals for people that had died of the pandemic in aged care facilities, we were able to lead a simpler and a good year for thinking about things. And coming out of that, as we here in Australia are remarkably, and I read the Minister for Health, Greg Hunt, say today that there's no one in ICU units in Australia, and there's no new cases outside of those in quarantine. And I think there's some learnings from what's happened here that also tell us something of what an incredibly important responsibility Australia has in the period ahead, and how we have to lift from being comfortable with any form of mediocrity, really lift to offer the world a gift at this time. I think we've learned, and it's simple enough to say it this way, we've learned the importance of following the science, the medical advice, how that coincides with common sense. We've learned how important it is to trust one another, and thankfully, as a result of the many fine lives lived on this great land over many decades, what's often called social capital, there was enough goodwill and enough confidence, and the leadership, parliamentary leaderships were sufficiently clear about what needed to be done, and the sanctions were doable. We're able to cooperate together in a way that has been thus far contained the pandemic. And all of that was because we knew there was an emergency going on. We could see how infectious and and lethal this virus is. So I think going forward, it gives us a framework for how we respond to our circumstances. Clearly, we need to continue to be intellectually aware of what the best advice is, and all of us have a responsibility to make sure that the advice doesn't get mixed up with ideology of one kind or another. But particularly, we have to keep building trust. Thankfully, during the worst of the pandemic in where I am, although there were various groups who tried to do wedge politics over it and bring into the domain various ideological purposes, they were not successful because no one wanted to get sick or see this thing spread further, and there was so much goodwill in our community and readiness to trust and cooperate. But clearly we have to keep, and this is where Australia has such a big responsibility as a multi-faith, multicultural society, we have to build trust. The new president, Joe Biden in the United States, gives us a refreshing new beginning and new possibility, but clearly trust is low in the world, and all of us have to do what we can to build trust amongst this one human family on this tiny planet in this incomprehensibly vast universe of God's creation. One human family. So the trust building is the crucial issue. And the specifics that I'm aware of that Gabrielle mentioned before, for example, we had yesterday the celebration of the new treaty on banning nuclear weapons. Australia has not signed it. Many nations haven't signed it. Nuclear weapons states don't want to sign it. So there has to be a whole building of trust so that this treaty gets implemented properly, but more particularly that our children and grandchildren can grow up in a safe environment where they don't need to fear that terrible fate that happened to the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we saw in the last days of the former US president the terrifying possibility that the codes for those nuclear weapons, some 25,000 of them, obliterate more than everything millions of times, were in the hands potentially of fallible beings. Thankfully, the checks and balances of that substantial democracy held, and that fear that day passed. But it will be a good thing when these hideous weapons are no longer seen ludicrously as some form of a security system. That involves applying what common sense, science and medicine say, but it particularly involves building greater trust. It was wonderful to hear that President Biden said that the future belongs to diplomacy rather than threat and counter-threat and weapon and more weapons. Quiet diplomacy. I'm staying in the home of our son and his wife, both Australian diplomats, and I know how hard they work, and I know how important the work they do is, and it's part of that trust building. But each of us as individuals have a responsibility with every decision we make to interrogate our decisions, and I'm going to close in a minute after this, interrogate every decision we make just to be sure that this decision will be trust building. The thoughts that come, the words we want to choose, the actions we want to take, will this build trust? And the best way to assess it is those receiving it, will they find it beautiful? Will they find it kind? Will they find it that it's true? Well, with be it nuclear disarmament or preventing further climate change or racism or any of the other things that tear at the unity of the human family, all made in the divine image, all cherished by the one who is utterly kind and unassuming, well, we begin each day again, as St. Anthony used to say, and we do our best to, in a sense, I think, in summary, as a great Bede Griffiths had as a motif of his ashram in India, simple living, high thinking. Simple living, high thinking is the way ahead. And the high thinking includes Australia having a high view of what is our responsibility and our possibility to bring healing and hope and beauty and kindness to a humanity deeply in need of healing and renewed hope. So I hope some of that's helpful and pass back to Gabrielle to carry us forward. And dear Charlie, who I met when we were both at a retreat organised by the Brahma Kumaris that was in India 2 years ago, pretty much about now, on spiritual leadership in a time of crisis. Now, little did we know then all that lay ahead, but out of that we've got a bond, a beautiful bond, and I'm very grateful bond with the folk of the Brahma Kumari community. And out of that initiative, that invitation, a friendship and a bond that we can continue to express tonight and in other ways and in other times. So peace be with you all, and thank you for your attentiveness.
Oh, Philip, thank you so much. I found that to be such a deep, actually, and very rich sharing that you gave to us. And, you know, during that Jesus Have Mercy prayer, I felt absolutely enveloped in an orb of peace. And I can appreciate how over your many years of practice of that, you've built up that ability to go into it very naturally and feel and bring forward those resources. And I also found your comments really resonated, and you know how beautiful is the divine love, and God is utterly kind and unassuming. I was in a retreat recently, a completely silent retreat, no phones, no eye contact, no talking, no music, no journaling. So it was a way to just stay within and consider my own inner terrain. And some of the things that came up resonated with this 3rd century saints that you quoted. In wonder we comprehend, and I was so mindful of the beautiful nature around us and how precious it is and what it gives to us, and that when we move deeply into those experiences and come out of them, how it changes our consciousness forever. And I liked your comment too about God will always have something to teach us, and we will always have more to learn. I think too that for many of us, you know, the experience that you shared of a simple lifestyle and going back to a simple lifestyle during 2020, because of the restrictions, of course, of outer movement, but enabling us to make decisions. And you mentioned that yourself, that you know we put off for a long, long time. And yeah, there are a lot of things happening in that talk. It was lovely. The big key message around building trust as a multicultural and multiracial society, and Australia's responsibility to do that as part of our contribution to a consciousness change globally. And with that, manifesting a very big physical change as well. And that last one, a great checkpoint is every decision I'm making, will it build trust? Does it bring kindness? So, Philip, thank you so much for sharing those words. I know they're deeply based on your experience, and that came through in the tone of your words and your vibration. Thank you very much. Can I just check with you? I'm aware that, excuse me, you're involved in a discussion with Ambassador Jamie Isbista. He's the Australian Minister for the Environment, and that's a public talk on the 18th of February. We'd love to put that in the chat box if you're open to that, so that our viewers can find out about it and can, of course, tune into it in Eventbrite. Now, Philip, is it online or is it in Canberra?
I don't think we've quite decided that, but it certainly will be in Canberra at the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture. But obviously, putting it online is a good next step, and I'm sure we'll be able to do that. Right. And you and I were at that last COP in Madrid, and the follow-up one is really crucial. This one now in Glasgow at the end of this year, because it's the one where the Paris Agreement, nations have to show that they're actually doing what the Paris Agreement requires, which means they have to every 5 years bring a better contribution to preventing global temperatures rising. And it's fantastic that President Biden, on his first half hour of being president, rejoined the Paris Agreement. So, yes. So, and Ambassador Jamie's a wonderful person. I met him like you did there, and I've got great confidence in his leadership. But Australia's contribution is part of that, giving hope to the world. So this seminar gives us a chance to catch up where things are up to, and work with Jamie to try and ensure Australia makes its best contribution in the period ahead.
That's great. And if it can be online, I'm sure, well, I'll be in for it for sure. And I'm sure a lot of us will be as well. It's a great opportunity. And thanks for setting that up and sharing it with us. So we'll get that in the chat box for you viewers, and you'll be able to participate as well. Look, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. It's Charlie Hogg, and he is the director of the Brahma Kumaris in Australia. As a senior teacher of the Brahma Kumaris, he travels extensively. I should probably qualify that and say he used to travel extensively internationally. His travel is mostly through cyberspace these days, but his travel involves sharing his experiences of applying spirituality in daily life and teaching meditation. From experience, he knows meditation is an extraordinary tool to maintain mental and emotional and spiritual health. And he shares that with Philip, that understanding with Philip. And in a world increasingly challenged by anxiety, by stress, by greed, and by depression, it really is something very necessary for all of us to do. Charlie feels that there's a need for a new wisdom for contemporary life. With over 7 billion people populating our planet, what is our impact on each other, the environment, and the future? How can I, just one person, contribute in a way that really makes for a better world? So these are some of the questions that Charlie reflected on that called him to begin meditating over 40 years ago. He considers that our intellectual abilities help us handle the external world, but often fall short when it comes to navigating the internal world, a world often dominated by an overactive mind, feelings of self-doubt, or a sense of superiority. And this is where Charlie feels spirituality has a role to play. He says that spirituality helps us transverse the internal world to understand and experience the intrinsic self. And he maintains that the first relationship in life is with our inner being. And if that becomes dysfunctional, everything becomes polluted inside and out. Charlie, it's lovely to have you with us on Youniverse. And in the context of that introduction, we're really looking forward to your sharings on Invocations 2021. A very warm welcome.
So thank you so much, Gabrielle. It's thank you so much for having me on this beautiful event with a really touching atmosphere. And Philip, it was just so lovely to hear you. It was both touching and inspiring, and you were remembering our little time together in Delhi. And really, my experience of Philip is he's a wonderful example of what he talks about as an incredibly humble, kind, and trusting person. And so I think that's the most powerful message in our world when we really walk our talk. And actually, when Gabriel was sharing your epiphany, I had my own epiphany when I was about 17, in fact, in the national capital. I was at university in Melbourne, at Melbourne University, and I was on a bit of an internal journey, and I went up to the university's festival at ANU, the Australian National University. It was the time of the Vietnam War. I was just 17 years old, and I was a bit of a social activist at that time. And so a part of the festival was a march against the Vietnam War, which I joined. And one thing led to another. A lot of the students got quite excited. And before I knew it, many of us were arrested, including me. And I was in the federal prison in the national capital with about 200 other young students at the time. And over the night, you know, it was the 1970s and many of us were sitting in the cells. There were so many of us in each cell. We began to sing John Lennon songs, I think you could imagine, at the time. But as things settled down, we began to speak. And there was this really sort of animated conversation into the early morning hours. And I was just this young, impressionable person sitting in the corner of the cell, listening to a lot of the leaders of the peace movement of this country. And it had such a powerful effect on me that here we were, the so-called leaders of the peace movement, and we were such an angry and negative and aggressive group of people. And it dawned on me so deeply, change is not going to happen in this way. And it really, I suppose, kick-started me incredibly deeply that, you know, if we really want change in the world, there has to be change within me. And I think my whole spiritual journey was born powerfully out of that moment. And I just really loved the way you described our incredible human family. I just feel so touched by the variety and the color of this extraordinary human family. 7.8 billion people, 195 countries, 6,500 spoken languages, 4,500 religions. How extraordinary is that? That's, I often call the outer world, or the seen world, if I can say that, the material world. And the world that I can see and hear and taste and touch. But there's another world which is, I would say, equally powerful. And that's the inner world, or the unseen world. The world of our human hearts and our human minds. And sometimes I have the image that 7.8 billion human beings pumping thought streams into the atmosphere. You know, some scientists tell us that we can create 70,000 unique thought patterns in a waking day. I have no idea how they counted them, but each human mind is contributing to like a thought soup. And we live in this incredible thought soup that we all contribute to, and it influences all of us. And really, the more I go on and I see the world around us, which is seemingly degenerating, unraveling in front of our eyes, you know, I feel, well, what is really feeding that? It's really, I would say, the collective human mind. It's our collective human mind that is feeding what we're seeing in front of our eyes in the world. And when the collective human mind is full of greed, we create this material culture that is destroying our environment, as Philip was alluding to. When the collective human mind is full of ego, there's only this self-interest. There's not that reaching out to my fellow brothers and sisters in the world. When the collective human mind is full of anger, look at the conflicts we have in the world. And when the collective human mind is so full of self-doubt, then we fear the other who perhaps looks different from me. And I really feel that we're watching this amazing sort of energy from the human minds manifesting in our material world around us. But 2020 for me was extraordinary, because even though the world seemed to be more and more chaotic, there seems to me to be a growing awareness of wanting to bring about some fundamental change. And I think that fundamental change, you know, it's almost like there's two energies that are polarizing in our world at the moment, as far as I can see. If we look through the physical eyes, a very sort of a tsunami of destructive energy. But if we look through our spiritual eye, our third eye, I feel there's little pockets of people all over the world who want fundamental change, absolutely fundamental change, and are really looking, and I think the seed of this fundamental change to me is it begins with me. When we change, we're going to see something different. And last year I was in New York at a retreat with the most eclectic, extraordinary group of people. And I was so inspired because they were from all countries, all over the planet, all different religious backgrounds, non-religious backgrounds. But in all the communities, they were talking about this whole wave of change, of people understanding that what we're seeing outside is the result of inside of each one of us, and we're all fundamentally responsible. And I find that incredibly powerful. And at the heart of this movement, I feel is connection. And I think my invocation for the coming year, I would say, is connection. You know, connection is in the DNA of the human spirit, to connect, to belong, to feel close, to feel included. To me is absolutely at the heart of, you know, connection is this sense, this really sweet feeling. But when we look on the other side, there seems to me a crisis in the soul of humanity. And when it bubbles to the surface, it's full of disconnection, alienation, separation, feelings of rejection. And so much of it to me is based on the awareness of difference, based on gender, based on, you know, belief systems, based on color, based on culture. So many, it seems our world is emphasizing where we're different rather than where we really connect. And during the last few years, I found these movements, the Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, the disability movement, the aged movement, the movement of sexual preference, whatever you call it, it's almost like a yearning from the human spirit. Don't label me by how I appear superficially. I'm in fact a spirit, a soul. And our sense of connection and commonality is based that the soul, the spirit, the consciousness, the fundamental me is beyond all these labels that are constantly dividing our world and making us feel so, I would say, disconnected and alienated. And to me, I feel there is this incredibly wonderful movement, and my wish, invocation for this coming year of spirituality, if I can use that word, to reconnect us to our true selves, to reconnect us to God, and to reconnect us to each other. And you know, when I meditate, and I, like Philip, you know, every single morning, my day begins with meditation. And sometimes when I look at my inner world and what happens when I meditate, it's like I'm constantly connecting. You know, the human mind is a wonder. In a split second, I can connect with a memory 10 years ago. I can connect with a person on the other side of the world. I can connect with what I just did or what I'm just about to do. We're constantly connecting. And the deeper when I observe my inner process, which is really, I think, the wonder of the spiritual journey, I observe that whenever I connect, instantly I'm influenced. Whatever I connect with influences me. And it's almost like I download or I live stream a feeling back into my mind. And so my mind carries these feelings inside. So when I connect with someone, I get on well with, I have a loving relationship. The instant I connect, that love, I'm influenced by that love, lovely warm feeling inside. If I connect with somebody, I remember somebody I'm going through a little bit of difficulty with, instantly a bit of peacelessness mentally and a discomfort emerges. And I really feel that this is a time for us to really reflect. For me, I'm really reflecting on my fundamental connections, and based on that, what sort of energy I'm putting out into the world around me. And to me, the first connection is with myself as the eternal soul. I absolutely love to sit quietly and just let go all the labels that my body represents and just sit lightly in the awareness of the permanent self. And the feelings I find, the more I sort of connect there, the whole inner world cools down, calms down, and my mind enters a silent space, such a sweet space, which has so much clarity. And it's like I see myself beyond a lot of my limitations. And when I'm sitting in that sweet space, I feel it's so much easier to connect with others as a soul, beyond all the labels or differences. And I feel this is really what all the great traditions of our world have taught us for so long. We're a human family. We belong to each other. We connect to each other. If we see only what is limited and what our bodily image represents, there's a multifold reasons of feeling different. But I feel God's wisdom was to teach us that we are souls and we have this fundamental sense of belonging and connection. And I feel as much as the division seems to be growing on one level, there's a yearning in the human heart to reconnect and belong. But that first connection with the intrinsic self, the second connection with each other as souls beyond the differences, and of course the third with God, the highest connection of the human mind. And I could absolutely relate to what Philip was saying, because what I love to do is wake really early in the morning when it's really silent. And I love to become like a little child and sit in front of God as an ocean of love, as a source of love, and open myself and allow myself to be completely loved. And I find that the most powerful therapy for me. And if I've been holding on to stuff or a bit over judgmental or critical or getting caught in things, I just find that love just softens me and heals me. And it does something to really shift something profoundly deep inside of me. And perhaps those feelings that you expressed, Philip, in the Jesus prayer come through. There's a lot more compassion, natural compassion and mercy. I find that when I really feel loved by God, my vision changes, my attitude changes, it softens, it's much more positive. And so for me, I feel 2021 is the real year of, I hope, connection, reconnection to the self, to each other, and to the divine. And I feel the first law is just to pay attention to what I connect to. Because if the mind connects to all the issues, of course we have to be aware of them. But if I dwell on them, it makes me sad, it makes me heavy. And often it doesn't really allow me to be more supportive or cooperative with others. But if I really connect with the divine, I think that second law of when I come under the influence of the divine, then I download a feeling into my mind, and I feel the mind becomes like a perfume that permeates the atmosphere. And that's what I really love, that when the human souls start to reconnect with the divine and the true self, It like creates a vibration that's going to start pumping a different energy, which is influencing the seen world, which we're observing around us at the moment. So I would just like to maybe offer a few thoughts for meditation. And if everyone who's with us tonight would just like to sit very quietly and put down any devices or distractions. And I'm just going to offer a few thoughts to take us on an inner journey to reconnect. Let me follow these thoughts with a gentle determination to experience them and feel them. Whatever my mind connects to creates my experience inside. And during this time of great challenge, where my mind can be pulled to numerous issues and numerous problems, let me go back to the essence and first explore the connection with my permanent self, the eternal self, I, the soul. Just visualize yourself as a point of energy, sitting lightly in the center of the forehead, in the front of the brain. This is I, the eternal soul, the being that has lived before this body and will continue after. The more I reconnect with this intrinsic self, I open the door to a quality of peace that fills my inner world with the energy of calm and silence. I am a peaceful soul. I am a peaceful soul. And in the eye of my mind, I connect with the light of God, the light of the divine. Just visualize this beautiful, radiant jewel of light, an embodiment, an ocean of pure love. And just feel this divine love filling me, caressing me, healing me. Allow yourself to be completely loved. And now observe how still your inner world is. Observe how strong you feel. And observe the sense of my relationship with me. The feelings of my own value begin to emerge. The more I connect with the divine, the more I maintain this connection in the year to come, the more I become an instrument to bring some peace, happiness, and love into our world. Thank you so much.
It was lovely, thank you, Charlie. Yeah, gorgeous meditation. I was appreciating some of your comments about the differences between the seen world and the unseen world, and the emphasis that you place on the unseen world. And I agree that there is a kind of subterranean collective mass of people who are really looking inwards and knowing that this is a good way to move forward in terms of solutions for our world. And I was appreciating too your key word for 2021, connection, it being a basic human need for all of us to belong and to reconnect with ourselves as a soul, and to reconnect us to each other, and of course to reconnect us to God, the divine. So a year of connection and reconnection. Thank you, Charlie. That's beautiful.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Yeah. Philip, can I pitch in here and ask you a question? Charlie's key word for 2021 is connection. I'm wondering what yours might be. If you could sum it up in one or two words, what would be the essence or the key word that you would bring into 2021?
I think it is trust building.
Yeah. Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah. Thank you. Are you both ready for some questions? I've got a few coming in here from the chat box. Philip, this is one that's saying, it's not a question, it's saying, please will you put that Canberra event environment dialogue online? So there's obviously quite a few people who are wanting to be involved in that one, and so let's see how we can help with that. Here's one here that says, what's the difference between meditation and prayer? And what is the difference between mindfulness meditation and prayer? You know, I think that's something that both of you could answer. Who would like to begin with that?
Philip, please.
Well, one exercise I thought of adding into those few minutes of the Jesus prayer, which is meditation and is prayer, is, and this is something people might like to use, is as we continue to pray, Jesus, have mercy, is to imagine in our mind's eye people who we love, people who've asked for our prayers, and people who are on our hearts for whatever reason. And we know that mysterious way in which people can come to mind, and we feel drawn that we should offer prayer for them. So a point where prayer and meditation, such as the Jesus prayer, intersect then is having established oneself in the Jesus prayer, in that form of meditation, one can then imagine in one's mind's eye people in need of prayer, people we love, people we've asked for our prayers. And in that way, the meditation then becomes intercessory, and we're offering our prayers. As one of the great saints was encouraged us to understand and believe, prayer upholds the world. So as we are bidden to, and it's a part of the way things have been designed, God creates us and God invites us to ask for those things that we need. In the teachings of Jesus, seek and you shall find, ask and it will be given to you. So intercessory prayer is part of what we might call the divine economy. It's our co-creating of a better world with the divine, our co-participation in the divine grace. So I guess in essence, prayer and meditation then flow one into the other and back into the other. So the distinctions then not so much what's significant. What is significant is that we do it.
And the vibration that it creates, of course. Yes. Yeah. Charlie, do you want to add to that?
Maybe just a little. I think that prayer and meditation have more in common than being different, because I think the common element is the seeking of the self to have a relationship with the divine, to connect with the divine, to experience God. In terms of mindfulness, etc., I feel that mindfulness has been an incredible boon for the world, because I think it has perhaps opened the minds of so many people to a spiritual practice, to an inner care. And so I really, really feel it's been incredibly special. But I think there's another layer I often call soulfulness, where I sort of, mindfulness can sort of help me observe my thoughts and learn a bit about my inner world. Soulfulness connects me to my intrinsic state of peace. But heartfulness is perhaps what prayer and meditation really is to me, which is when I, the soul, connect with God, which I think is really the highest union that I think gives a sense of satisfaction and contentment that really nothing else can in life. And so I find that movement to that ultimate connection with God, whatever is my religious tradition, is really, I think, the soul on the journey to the highest internal experience possible.
Thank you for that, Charlie, that clarity. Philip, I'm going to pitch something to you here. The question is, you are someone who maintains a balance with inner stillness and inner activism with your outer activism. How do you do this? How do you maintain that balance?
I think that changes over time. Obviously, the spiritual practice is crucial, and I think in these times we're living in, that's really important that people, whatever their practice is, that they practice it to give themselves that resilience for living. But for me, in terms of then, one has to make choices. There's lots of things one can do and be active about, and I've done all sorts of things. But at the moment, the way I'm making the choices is to put my energy into things that I think are going to benefit my grandchildren and their generation. So I think you have to kind of make some decisions as to what principles are going to guide your activism. Lots of things one could do, lots of things that are needed. But for me at the moment, the way I'm making the choices is to, and it's helped by an insight of Gandhi, who said the best policies are made if we look at the world through the eyes of children.
That's right.
And for me, aware of our grandchildren, the world that they're growing up in, and their generation, children of their age, all under 10, I'm trying to focus on things that I think are going to benefit their living safe and free and healthy lives. Hence the focus on things like nuclear disarmament and the focus on preventing climate change. And apart from that kind of way of principling one's choices, I think then one just has to be open to the abiding spirit. And when things come along that don't fit into the box so readily, but they seem to be of the divine, they have that right energy about them, they have spirit about them. So I think the other conclusion is to just try and be flexible. And open, keep some space so that the unexpected has some room when it might come. And I've found over the years, sometimes when I've looked ahead and wondered how I was going to manage all the things I just agreed to do, mysteriously, some things you thought you might have to do, people ring up and apologize, they have to cancel it, or the date changes, and somehow or other God looks after us. All we do is get up, say our prayers, enter the day with as much goodwill as we can muster and with not much clarity as we can as to what we're going to do, and trusting God to keep looking after us as we do our best to make the world a more beautiful, kind and truthful place. So that's a bit of a rambling answer, but maybe it makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, I picked it up. I think there's some lovely messaging in that one, Philip. Charlie, do you want to make a comment?
I was in South Africa in 1994 when Nelson Mandela was made president, and it was an incredible time. It was like the whole country was having a party. It was an extraordinary atmosphere. But I learned so much from, I suppose, the activism of Nelson Mandela, because, in my understanding, I read his book, Long Road to Freedom, in the plane back. Incredible book, absolutely incredible. And that he was really an activist to the point of, even he described himself, he was involved in terrorism, basically acts of terrorism. He went into jail and he was incarcerated for 27 years. And while in jail, he read all the scriptures of all the main traditions of the world. And he went through this incredible transformation. And his whole activism changed. And I think he did something which I found extraordinary. He won over everyone, even, the white government, etc., because he respected his enemies. The most disarming thing to do is to give genuine, and he gave genuine respect. In his book, the people who were jailing him and who did so many things against him, he was learning positive attributes for them. And I think that power of spirituality, it's like an inner activism, that I'm not going to resort to anger, hatred, rejection of the other perspective, but I'm going to maintain respect. But still, he never said apartheid was good, but he never hated the people who perpetrated that regime. Philip, do you want to share something there?
I met a man at the World Council of Churches from South Africa early last year before the pandemic, and he walked with Nelson Mandela from his prison cell to the car that was to take him away. And you may have visited that cell, that tiny cell where he faced so much humiliation and brutality. And this fellow said to me that as they walked from the prison to the car waiting for Nelson Mandela said to him, by the time I get to that car, I'm going to leave all of this behind. And so there was an enormous will. He knew that if he was to be the reconciling leader the nation needed, he couldn't carry the enmity and the bitterness and all the reasons he had for feeling unjustly treated, which were enormous. If he was going to be the reconciling leader, he had to leave it all behind. And then he did, as you just said. He had that will, that purpose, and that character to evolve, to be the leader that the nation needed. And it's one of the most astonishing acts of spiritual leadership in our time. And, you know, it's just the kind of leadership we need now. We need leaders at every level who have that character, not to foster, nurture division. And we don't need to elect leaders who cannot create unity and who are intentionally or ineptly divisive. We need leaders who want to be reconciling characters and figures and who can leave their own history behind enough to lead in that way that we see in the model of Nelson Mandela. In terms of the things you reflected on in your meditation, I think it's the most important thing in this period ahead, and that builds trust.
Philip, can I ask you, Gabriel, is it okay if I ask Philip something?
Yes, please do.
Because I'd love to see or hear how to genuinely build trust, because that is a crisis in our world at the moment.
Actually, there's a question on that that's come in, and I'll just read it from the community. It's similar. It's saying, what can an individual do on a daily or weekly basis that could contribute to building trust in our communities? So it's a pivotal question, isn't it? What is it actually that we're doing daily that builds trust?
Well, I think one part of it is, just as we've reflected, be careful and attentive as to who is offered leadership, and make sure that they have the character to lead as we need it to be. I think a second thing is to be attentive to the history. That you can't cheat the history. You can't go around it. The history is what it is, and the history is full of mistrust. So therefore, as we were saying before, to build trust, each decision for everybody, and we've all got a responsibility for this, has to be made thinking about, will this build trust, or will it just fan further mistrust? Will it create that atmosphere you spoke of, Charlie, that beauty, that kindness, that peace that allows people to, it's a synergy that then allows, it multiplies itself, doesn't it? And we saw it through the pandemic, as people saw other people were actually functioning in a disciplined manner according to the things required of them. It built trust. People accepted the differences, difficulties, and the sacrifices. They saw others doing it, and they could see it was for the common good. So I think have to be respectful of the history. It is what it is. There's no point being deluded about it. But then we have to build carefully from that. And I think the third thing is that although there's a lot, particularly through the media, that amplifies division and difficulty, and my friend, the filmmaker, keeps reminding me that in a very competitive media environment, with a lot of media outlets looking for our attention, there is a bit of a tendency for them to go to the most divisive and the most conflicted story, which can distort our perceptions of reality. I mean, life isn't as bad as the 6 o'clock news, thankfully. But the other side of that is that there is every day, wherever you go, you see people making each other laugh, looking after each other, being careful with car spaces on a hot day here in Canberra, letting people get in, cross the road, people with looking after each other's kids in swimming pools. There's enormous kindness and goodwill in people. And so I think we can have confidence, real confidence. People want things to be better, want their, as I said before, their children to feel safe, them to feel safe, and everybody to be delighted in the gift of life. So things aren't as fragile as they might seem, and that we should have that confidence about things.
I'm going to move into another question here that's come through. There's two or three, and so this is taking us into another space, but it's obviously connected. And it's saying that now that a nuclear ban treaty is in place since yesterday, will we all be okay? It's a big question.
So would you like me to respond to that?
Yeah, both actually would be great. But Philip, if you could pitch first, that would be lovely.
So this has been a wonderful initiative of a group of Australians. The acronym is ICANN, and they won the Nobel Peace Prize for this. And their effort has been just to bring back to world attention the fact that there are these terrible weapons of mass destruction. And they were driven to do it because the framework for nuclear disarmament hasn't been getting anywhere. So essentially, without going into a lot of detail, there have been episodes when the community's been aware of the issue, and then we've all gone back to sleep. So there was the ban the bomb movement in the 1960s to get rid of testing in the atmosphere. You know, that terrible testing that happened at Maralinga, as in Australia. So that led to testing not being in the atmosphere, but all that happened was the testing went underground. And so there were the terrible tests in the South Pacific, in those beautiful atolls of the Pacific. And then there was a comprehensive test ban treaty, and Australia had a lot to do with that. And then there's been a period of détente between USSR and USA and so on. But in recent years, under the Trump regime, a lot of the disarmament measures were kind of just walked away from. And I'm not going to get too technical, I promise you. But there's a thing called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is meant to mean that the nuclear weapon states get rid of their nuclear weapons, and no one else, because they're doing that, no one else tries to get them. That's called, preventing vertical and horizontal proliferation. But that's just not getting anywhere. And so these people brought this in to kind of be a moment when the human family said, again, look, let's just get rid of these things. So now, through that initiative, and it was ratified through the UN, so it's now part of the UN apparatus, there's new and fresh momentum to make the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty really work. And that's to really get the nuclear weapon states to disarm and no other nations, and we see the speculation about nations that may want to gain nuclear weapons, no others to gain them. So it's given fresh impetus, but until we get nation states ready and trusting enough to get rid of these weapons, it won't have achieved its goal. It's a step on the way, in summary. Hope that wasn't too complicated.
No, that was fantastic. We're getting a few questions coming in here, so I'm going to push through with them. I hear that we are stronger when we live in the moment. How is this possible?
That's for you, Charlie.
Yeah, I think it's for you, Charlie. There's another one here for you, Charlie, too. What's the connection between thought soup and fake news?
Oh, maybe I can start with that. I think that, it's a powerful image for me that, we see the physicality of our world, but we feel the thought soup. It's constantly influencing us. And I think one of the great challenges of the recent time is really what is true and what is false. What do we know coming our way? I have a friend in London who, he's a jeweler. Well, he was a diamond merchant, and he once told me that they now make fake diamonds that are so good no one can tell the difference, even the experts. And it's sort of a good metaphor for the world today for me. There's so much fake stuff going around, and I think what we saw in the end of the last presidency in America, what was true and what was false, it was just, what's the difference? People are accessing so many different platforms to find their particular truth. So yes, the thought soup is feeding this sort of fake news phenomena, I would say. I think that living in the moment is about, really accessing spirituality, because the nature of the human mind is that because of my past experience, my mind is always trying to reconcile the past and is often projecting onto the future. So the moment in front of me is often absolutely lost. But when I feel sit with God and experience, that's really like, and that fuels my thinking, fuels my decision making, fuels my activity, the experience of connectedness. And why I feel more and more that prayer, meditation isn't something you do morning and night. It's trying to, amalgamate it with your life, with your family, with your work, with your responsibility, that it's like an expression. Your connection with God is expressed through each part of your life. And that's when I think it really has a power and has an influence. Just the way Philip was talking about Nelson Mandela, it was actually his personality, I felt, that influenced not just South Africa, the world, because he was such a forgiving and an extraordinary man. It just shows you, till this day, if our personality is spiritual, is virtuous, it has a massive impact. And his personality really impacted the entire planet, like Gandhi, like Martin Luther King, these people which we often mention in recent times.
And indeed, in the living moment, people like Jacinda Ardern and her response to the Christchurch bombings of the mosques, not bombings, but gunnings of the mosque. And we can see this in a few leaders around our world today too, that putting people first, coming in with compassion and kindness, and the big impact that has on our communities. There's another question that's come in here. In fact, there's two before we close. This one's saying, any message for the Indian leadership keeping in view the Trump ideology of supremacy of any section of society? Who wants to respond to that one? Do I need to read it again? Did you catch it? Any message for the Indian leadership keeping in view the Trump ideology of supremacy of any section of society?
Philip, do you want to have a go at that one?
I think there's some understandable presuppositions that are in the question. Maybe if I just say two things. The first is that in relation to leadership and building trust, truthfulness really is very, very important. We're a species that we can only cohere by being able to trust each other's words and symbols. That's how we are. We don't function instinctively. We have to be able to trust what other people say. And we therefore have to be responsible to say things that are true, not things that are false. So that's part of the trust building that lies ahead. In relation to India, which we all love and know a little bit, I think the concern that I hear at the moment is, and it's a wonderful democracy. I was in India when they had an election, and over the TV comes 1 billion people vote or something like that. So amidst many regimes that are not democracies, they nonetheless stand out as a democracy. I think the concern at the minute, though, is whether or not the current leadership is going to be respectful of the plurality, including the religious plurality of the country. And it's a big issue for a number of places, and it's particularly the issue of how the majority treats the minority, whether it's the leadership of the Indian government and its treatment of Muslims and Christians, or whether it's the Pakistani government and its treatment of Hindus and Christian minorities. It's the same issue. And the care, and it's therefore for the Australian, it's part of the Australia that we can give hope to the world. Our religious plurality religious freedom, and in particular, the way in which minorities get looked after, don't get crushed by the majority, and have the freedom to practice their faith. I think it should be, instead of McDonald's signs on the street corners, we should have Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which basically is about religious freedom. And it says everybody should have the freedom to practice their faith, to change their faith, and change back if they so wish. That's rough speaking what it says. And it's so fundamental to human dignity and to freedom that people can practice their faith, change it if they want to, not practice it if they don't want to. That's what freedom is involved in. And so I think the hope is that things will settle, and the current leadership in the Indian government will be careful about what they're custodians of, which is rich and wonderful.
Thanks, Philip. Charlie, do you want to pitch in on that?
Oh, I just think Philip summarized that perfectly. I do feel I've visited India, I think 80 or 90 times. I've spent 8 or 10 years in India. And to me, the great wonder of that country is just what Philip described, that in every little village, Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims and Christians have coexisted. There has been moments over the history, no doubt, but generally incredibly beautifully. But it seems to be changing a little bit at the moment, because the central government is really focusing on one particular faith tradition, which is the majority religion in that country. And it is creating waves, there's absolutely no doubt. So let's hope that the great religious strength of India, really comes to the fore.
And I'm seeing a comment in the chat box. I think we are seeing President Biden showing this kind of leadership. And I would add that also Vice President Kamala Harris is showing a very inclusive of diversity approach to leadership with compassion and kindness. I'm going to finish with this last question. One of the pressing needs facing our world is the need for reconciliation. It's often viewed as a process that involves a lot of time. And when I place this next to the pressing need for environmental action right now, I wonder if quiet epiphanies across a critical mass of people will provide a significantly faster paradigm shift in consciousness around reconciliation, a paradigm shift in consciousness. And then it's saying, what role will silence play in this?
I mean, that's a massive question that we could go on for a long time. But I think it's a fascinating question, because I often feel there's like a shadow over humanity of past events and anger and resentment of things that have happened. And I often feel individually, almost every human being feels that, their community, whatever. And I feel that one of the massive sort of energies that creates reconciliation is forgiveness. And I really think if we all remain too stuck in the past, we can't move forward. We remain so stuck in, there's no doubt it has to be acknowledged, it has to be respected. But I think when we once again feel close to God, I think that energy to let go, forgive, move forward, we have to move forward. If we keep living in the past, I think the world will remain stuck. And so I think the power of forgiveness of myself first, forgiveness of others. And, that's one of the most compassionate attitudes. It's absolutely an attitude of true love, to forgive and move on.
Thanks. Philip, a comment from you. I know you were asked a question at the COP in Madrid in 2019. about reconciliation. This question's bringing in the role of silence in that process as well.
Well, just two things. I think musicians teach us how every note comes out of silence. So acquiring that inner silence, that stillness, and in the beauty of creation does keep us centered. And in relation to reconciliation, and complementing what Charlie was saying, that forgiving, silent listening to people is really, really important. I mean, I've worked quite a lot with refugees over the years, and one thing they've taught me is that when the narrative of one's life has been fragmented through war, violence, dislocation, refugee camp, finally getting here and getting settled, it's really important for people to have someone who will listen to them well and carefully and silently, in the sense of not interrupting, not asking open questions, not closed questions, keeping confidences, using a tone of voice that invites a person to speak for the whole of their story. Because then if people feel really well listened to, the fragmented narrative kind of starts to make a bit of sense. They can, understand looking back what now looks like, and then they can get some clarity for next steps. And in the process, be somewhat reconciled both with the events of the past, but also with people who, as Charlie said, they may need to offer that gift of forgiveness too. So there's that. I think in terms of reconciliation, a lot of people in our country need the value of being well listened to by someone who has those qualities about them. And that would be a wonderfully healing thing, help us as a nation to become our potential.
Deep listening, authentic leadership, they go together, don't they? I'm going to have to wind it up here. So listeners, thanks for your questions. I think we got through just about all of them, but I'm wondering what your invocations are for the new year, to consider what one word might sum up 2020 for you, and what one word you might use in foreseeing and evoking 2021. So something to think about there. Philip and Charlie, on behalf of the listeners, we give you our thanks, our love, and our blessings for sharing your thoughts and feelings on invocations for our new year, and for the self-determining leadership that you bring to our world. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Gabriel. It was lovely. Thanks for your time. Thank you, Philip. Wonderful to see you again.
So viewers, I invite you to check out the next series of Open Your Eyes to the Universe. Eternity Inc. has a full online range of books on self-development, meditation and spirituality, always at not-for-profit prices. You can visit the store, www.eternityinc.com.au, to browse. And the other matter, if you'd like to learn Raj Yoga meditation online and free of charge, visit our website for something special near you. Don't forget about the activity, the event that Bishop Philip is promoting. Do look at it in our chat box, and if it's available online, we'll let you know, because it would be lovely for you to be able to join in. If you'd like to subscribe to Open Your Eyes to the Universe to receive monthly updates, please email us at specialevents@au.brahmakamaris.org. And look, finally, I'd like to tell you about our next episode of Youniverse. It's on Saturday, the 27th of February, starting at 6 p.m. And our guest speaker is Dr. Sarah Eager. Sarah is chair of the Janki Foundation and a retired consultant psychiatrist, formerly at the Imperial College in London. Now, her topic is self-compassion. She'll explore the links between our body, our mind, and our soul, and how by using our deepest innate spiritual qualities, we can meet our own pain and suffering with patient kindness and care. Directing feelings of compassion inwards and learning how to focus our attention and energy on supporting ourselves can become the key tools in self-healing and building resilience. This ties nicely in with the invocations we were identifying for 2021. And this deeper understanding of ourselves allows us not only to care for ourselves more capably, but also enables us to more easily express compassion towards others and the environment. So we look forward to seeing you there then. Until then, take care. See you next month. Om Shanti.